Hey everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the vlog. So in today's midweek episode, we're going to be changing the springs on the Ford Transit Courier van. So we did originally were going to plan to put some helper springs, but after talking to the manufacturer, they said no, we just do straight replacements, which is better, I think. So we're going to replace those springs, and today we're going to be changing the fuel filter. Now, I have had a number of comments from you guys about why I didn't change the fuel filter when I was doing the service on the Courier. Well, sometimes you don't explain everything that's going on, and because you forget, essentially. Now, I hadn't planned on changing the Courier filter, the fuel filter, because when you change them on Fords, diesels particularly, the engine, which happens to be a Peugeot engine, out of interest, you have to purge the system. It doesn't prime the system like, for example, an Audi's. When you turn the ignition on an Audi, it primes the system, so it pumps it down. You can't do that on a Ford. So if you change the filter and you don't purge the system or prime the system manually, you then find that you won't be able to start the van. So that's why we never did it, because I never had the pump. I now have the pump, so we're going to do it. That's all. That's the only reason why. So sometimes if you see me do something or service and I forget an element, or you think I forget an element, it's because I'm either going to do it at a later date or I'm doing it off camera. If I'm going to do it on camera, then I'll tell you. Okay? Hope that clears up a few things. Right. So anyway, let's sort out the springs in the van. Now this should be pretty straightforward because the Courier is based on a Fiesta. So there should be a swing arm that we've just released the shocks. We drop them down, the springs come out with a little bit of gentle persuasion. We put the new springs in, tighten up the shocks, back on, van sits pretty. That's a theory. Now, why we're doing this is because the van, when it's well, not even half filled, when it's got some water in it, about 200 litres, which is about 200 kilos, it sits too low. And it's not because the van is overloaded, because the van has a payload of 660 kilos. Now that 660 kilos includes the driver as well. And what we've worked out is with the tank, all the bits and pieces in there, we've weighed them individually and it comes to 157 kilos. That's included the driver, which means that we should be able to safely put at least 450 kilos in the vehicle and still be underweight. At the moment, when we put about 200 or 300, the van is sitting quite low. And that's because the springs they use in the domestic springs. So we've got some heavy duty springs, not supplied by Ford, supplied by MAD, and they're a specialist in springs. This is not sponsored by them, by the way. I bought them. It took a long time to come. That's the reason why we're doing this at a later date. Anyway, enough waffling. Let's get on and do it. Right, so this is going to either be very quick or very time consuming. So here's the original springs, as you can see. We've got the shock here, so all we need to do really is undo this bolt. We're going to use the jack to just jack this up a little bit so that this is compressed. And then we undo this bolt. But first of all, we're going to give it a good squirt with some WD-40. Make sure it's very well lubricated. And then we'll get the impact wrench, undo this, and then that should be it. It should just come apart. That's the theory. Let's see what happens in reality. Right, so we've got the new spring, old spring. What's the difference between the two? This spring much stiffer. If you look at the top here, you can barely see it, but these springs are much more tighter at the top, and then they space out down the bottom. Here they're a little bit more spaced out, and I think that's where we're losing the height, because these springs are thinner, that they don't have the strength, whereas this one's a lot more tighter. And this in turn should mean that the vehicle's height stays higher with heavier loads on here. So these springs are designed for assisting with towing with caravans, which will weigh down the vehicle, so we should see a big difference, or at least a difference that doesn't make the van look like it's overweight. Right, let's get them fitted. Before we put this bolt on, if you notice, it's got Loctite on there. I just noticed that, so we're going to put some Loctite on it and undo the other one and do that. So here's the original springs that we've taken out of the van. These are the original stock springs that you would get in a Fiesta or a B-Max. Nothing special about them, but obviously you saw the effects that it had on the van. So this is what the van looks like now after being driven. Look at the ride height. It is mass improvement, and this is half full of water. Now normally it would have been right down, so where you see the top of the wing or the wheel arch, it would have been down there when it's full of water. Now look at it. You can see that the van is sitting much prouder. That's the way it should be. A simple little mod that took less than an hour to complete, probably less than that, even half an hour to fit the new springs in, and now it's done. So they weren't spring fillers, they're from a company called Mad, and normally what they do is they sell you springs that fit inside. But when I spoke to them, they said to me, actually for the Fiesta Courier, they just do replacement heavy duty springs because these are useless. As they said to me, they're rubbish. So now the van is riding at its correct height, and like I said, it does make a massive difference to the ride height and safety.